The story begins in the cold and misty frontiers of Roman Britain, where one of Rome's most legendary and mysterious disappearances is said to have occurred. The 9th Legion Hispana, a powerful fighting unit with decades of service behind it, marched north into the wild lands of the tribes, and was never seen again. The Roman Empire prided itself on discipline, order, and written record. Armies did not simply vanish. Yet this legion's fate was buried in silence, leaving historians and storytellers with fragments, rumors, and theories that stretch across centuries. The 9th had a proud history. It had fought under Julius Caesar in his campaigns in Gaul, endured civil wars, and was deployed to secure Britain after the invasion of 43 AD. For decades, it represented Roman might at the edge of the known world. Its soldiers were seasoned, hardened by countless battles, carrying the eagle standard that symbolized the empire's eternal power. But sometime in the early 2nd century, the official record of the 9th abruptly ends. No historian clearly states what happened. The legion's name simply vanishes from the lists of Rome's garrisons. To a civilization obsessed with cataloging military strength, this silence is deafening. The most dramatic theory suggests annihilation. According to later writers and legends, the legion marched into the north of Britain, modern Scotland, to suppress a rising among the fierce Caledonian tribes. These were warriors who painted their bodies, lived in rugged hills and forests, and knew the land better than any invader. The image is stark, thousands of Roman soldiers marching in rigid columns, shields glinting, banners swaying, their discipline facing the chaos of tribal ambushes. In this telling, the legion was surrounded, cut off, and massacred to the last man. The silence in Rome's records could then be deliberate, an attempt to bury the shame of such a devastating loss at the hands of so-called barbarians. Other scholars argue against this bloody end. Archaeological findings show that pieces of the 9th Legion's stamp, the brick and tile marks used by soldiers, appeared in the Netherlands and later along the Rhine frontier. This suggests that the legion may have been transferred out of Britain, quietly redeployed elsewhere in the empire. Perhaps its destruction came not from painted tribes in Britain but from enemies further east, facing Parthians, or in conflicts in Germania. In this version, the disappearance was not mysterious but bureaucratic. The legion was simply reassigned and later destroyed in battle far from the misty isles. Yet the fact remains, no definitive inscription, no clear final battle, no report survives. This gap created fertile ground for myth. Medieval chroniclers wove tales of the lost legion, sometimes imagining them absorbed into local populations, intermarrying with tribes, or wandering like ghosts. In modern times, writers and filmmakers seized on the story, turning the 9th into a symbol of imperial hubris and the untamable wildness of Britain. Rosemary Sutcliffe's novel The Eagle of the 9th popularized the idea that the legion vanished in Scotland and that its standard, the Golden Eagle, lay buried beyond Hadrian's Wall. In popular imagination, the story became less about logistics and more about mystery, about Rome meeting its match in a land it could never truly conquer. The power of this story lies in contrast. Rome, the empire of order, met chaos and silence. The legion, trained to stand unbroken, dissolved into disappearance. The meticulous Roman record-keepers left a void that has endured for 2,000 years. And in that void, we glimpse the reality of empire, that even the strongest armies were not invincible, that pride and steel could crumble in the face of nature, rebellion, or the shifting sands of politics. Whether the 9th was slaughtered in a remote glen of Scotland, reassigned quietly to another frontier, or destroyed in some forgotten battle far from home, the truth is that we will likely never know. The ground may still hold their bones, their weapons, their shattered shields, but history has covered them with layers of silence. The legion's disappearance reminds us that even the most powerful empires cannot fully control memory, that secrets of war often remain locked away, and that sometimes, the greatest mystery lies not in what is written, but in what is deliberately left unsaid. Thus the story of the vanished Roman legion stands as our first hidden military secret, an entire army that walked into history, and out of it, leaving nothing but questions, speculation, and an echo of marching feet fading into the mist. The Middle Ages are often remembered in romantic images, knights riding under fluttering banners, just before cheering crowds, chivalry and honor guiding men on the battlefield. Yet the reality of medieval warfare was far more brutal and pragmatic. Behind the polished armor and sacred oaths existed weapons so deadly, so unconventional, that even the powerful church tried to outlaw them. These weapons reveal a hidden side of history, a world where morality clashed with survival, where rulers ignored papal decrees, and where technology pushed warfare into darker, more devastating realms. One of the most notorious examples was the crossbow. To the modern eye, it might seem simple, a bow mounted on a wooden stock, designed to shoot bolts with immense force. But to medieval armies, it was revolutionary. Unlike the longbow, which required years of practice and incredible strength to master, the crossbow could be used effectively with only minimal training. A peasant, given a few hours of instruction, could suddenly kill an armored knight from a distance. This was nothing short of terrifying for the ruling class, who relied on their military superiority to maintain power. So alarming was this weapon that the Catholic Church intervened. In 1139, the Second Lateran Council declared the use of crossbows hateful to God, and attempted to ban them in wars between Christians. The ruling described the weapon as inhumane, capable of undermining the order of society itself. Imagine the fear: a knight who had trained from boyhood, sworn to codes of honor, might be felled in seconds by a farmer wielding a mechanical device. It threatened not only bodies, but the very hierarchy of medieval Europe. And yet, despite the ban, crossbows spread like wildfire. Kings and mercenaries could not resist their power, and so the decree of the Church became one of history's most ignored prohibitions. Another secretive and devastating weapon was Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary substance first developed by the Byzantines centuries earlier, but whispered about throughout the medieval period. Described as a liquid fire that clung to ships, men, and armor, it burned even on water and spread uncontrollably. Its exact formula was one of the most tightly guarded military secrets in history. Even centuries later, Crusaders and Muslim chroniclers wrote of the terror of facing it, of seeing flames hurled from siphons mounted on ships, consuming entire fleets in minutes. The Byzantines treated the recipe as state treasure, passing it down only to trusted emperors and chemists. To this day, historians still debate what it was made of: a mixture of naphtha, resin, quicklime, or something entirely unknown. Whatever the truth, it represents a perfect example of medieval, forbidden science, a weapon so feared that rumors of its existence alone were often enough to deter enemies. The Church also tried to intervene against poisons and chemical warfare, condemning the use of poisoned arrows, wells tainted with toxins, or chemical smokes designed to suffocate opponents. Yet records show that such tactics were not rare. In sieges, defenders sometimes launched dead animals, infected corpses, or foul substances over the walls of enemy camps to spread disease. During battles in Eastern Europe and Asia, warriors experimented with throwing pots filled with burning sulfur, pitch, or even quicklime powder that blinded soldiers on impact. These were crude but effective forms of chemical warfare centuries before modern times, and while chroniclers condemned them as dishonorable, commanders desperate to win sieges often turned to them in secret. The tension between morality and necessity is clear in these stories. The Church's stance was that weapons should preserve the honor of battle, sword against sword, man against man. But the reality of survival pushed armies to embrace whatever tool gave them an advantage. When a besieged castle faced starvation, when an empire feared invasion, lofty ideals often gave way to pragmatic cruelty. What makes this part of history so compelling is the contrast between what was preached and what was practiced. In sermons, knights were told they fought for God, bound by codes of conduct. In secret, rulers experimented with weapons that horrified even their allies. The battlefield was less about noble duels and more about fear, deception, and technological surprise. And these secret weapons shaped history in subtle ways. The spread of the crossbow, despite its ban, shifted the balance of power in Europe. No longer were knights untouchable, commoners gained a lethal edge, a glimpse of equality in violence. The terror of Greek fire helped Byzantium hold off invaders long past the empire's peak. The whispered use of poisons and chemical tricks foreshadowed the darker innovations of modern war. In many ways, the attempt to suppress these weapons made them even more alluring. A banned weapon is one that feels forbidden, dangerous, powerful. The Church's decrees against them stand as some of the earliest attempts at arms control, but just as in our own age, such rules were fragile when weighed against the desperation of war. Thus, the medieval world was not simply a stage of chivalry and honor, it was a battlefield of shadows, where hidden flames, poisoned arrows, and outlawed machines turned wars into nightmares. These secret weapons remind us that history's wars were never fought by rules alone, and that behind the shining armor of medieval legend lay a much darker reality. When we think of the Mongol Empire, we imagine thundering hooves across the steppe, warriors in fur and leather, arrows whistling through the air, and vast swathes of territory falling under their control. Yet behind this ferocious military machine lay a secret weapon often overlooked: knowledge. The Mongols did not conquer half the known world on strength alone. They did so with the help of hidden intelligence networks, stolen maps, and a sophisticated system of gathering information that gave them an invisible advantage over every rival they faced. For centuries, empires relied on spies and scouts, but the Mongols elevated this into a fine art. Before launching their legendary invasions of China, Persia, or Eastern Europe, Mongol agents disguised themselves as traders, pilgrims, or wandering travelers. They slipped into foreign cities, studied their fortifications, and mapped their roads and rivers. They spoke with merchants, bribed locals, and collected information about population numbers, food supplies, and military defenses. This data, compiled and carried back to the Khans, gave the Mongols a detailed picture of lands they had never officially set foot in. While their enemies often fought blind, the Mongols attacked with knowledge so precise it seemed supernatural. Maps were at the heart of this secret intelligence. To the steppe nomads, maps were more than parchment with drawings, they were lifelines. They recorded water sources, pastures, trade routes, and safe resting points across deserts and mountains. As the empire expanded, Mongol generals demanded detailed charts of enemy territories. Captured scholars, engineers, and navigators were forced to draft maps of their homelands, often under the threat of death. The result was an evolving library of military geography, hidden from outsiders but essential to the Mongol advance. A striking example is their campaign into Persia. When Genghis Khan sent his armies westward, his commanders already knew which passes through the mountains could accommodate cavalry, where food supplies could be seized, and how to cross the arid deserts. Persian chroniclers marveled that the Mongols seemed to move with uncanny foresight, striking exactly where resistance was weakest. To many, it felt as though the invaders had eyes everywhere. In truth, they did, their intelligence networks had prepared the path years in advance. The same was true in Eastern Europe. When Mongol armies reached Hungary and Poland in the 1240s, their commanders displayed a frightening awareness of terrain and local politics. Scouts had infiltrated these lands long before, disguised as traders along the Silk Road. They noted the weaknesses of castles, the rivers that froze in winter, the rivalries between neighboring lords. By the time Mongol horsemen appeared on the horizon, their leaders already knew how to exploit these divisions. The defenders thought themselves safe behind rivers and fortifications, but the Mongols had mapped alternate routes, planned ambushes, and prepared to shatter alliances with precision. It is important to remember that the Mongols themselves came from a culture where survival depended on intimate knowledge of the land. On the steppes, the difference between life and death often hinged on knowing where to find water, which valleys offered shelter from the wind, or where herds might graze. This sensitivity to geography became an empire-wide skill, applied on a massive scale. When blended with espionage, it produced something unique, a war machine fueled by both brute force and secret intelligence. The brilliance of their system lay in its invisibility. Maps and intelligence were not paraded like banners. They were stored, memorized, and shared only among trusted commanders. While the rest of the world marveled at Mongol horsemanship, their true secret was buried in the documents, charts, and memories of those who traveled ahead of the armies. These maps were never meant for public eyes. They were weapons in their own right, silent guides that allowed the Mongols to stretch their empire from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. Contrast this with their enemies. Medieval Europe, for example, had maps that were more symbolic than practical, drawn with biblical cities oversized, mountains exaggerated, and distances wildly distorted. A European knight might enter battle with a sword blessed by a priest, but without a realistic understanding of the geography beyond his village. The Mongols, by comparison, treated maps as sacred tools of war. To them, a good map could mean the difference between conquering a city or losing thousands of men. This obsession with secrecy extended even after victories. Mongol leaders often executed local mapmakers and guides after campaigns, ensuring their knowledge could not be used against them. Others were absorbed into the empire, forced to contribute to a growing archive that, tragically, has mostly vanished from history. What survives are only hints, Chinese records mentioning captured scholars, Persian accounts of Mongol spies, and European laments that the invaders always seemed to know the land better than its defenders. The hidden maps of the Mongols remind us of a larger truth: warfare is never only about swords, arrows, or sheer courage. It is about information. The Mongols understood this centuries before modern states created intelligence agencies or satellites. They weaponized knowledge in ways their enemies could scarcely comprehend, and it became one of the invisible foundations of their empire. By the time the Mongols stood at the gates of Vienna, much of the known world trembled not just at their speed and ferocity, but at their uncanny ability to appear exactly where they were least expected. To those who faced them, it seemed like dark magic. But behind the curtain, it was the secret art of intelligence, networks of spies, carefully crafted maps, and the ruthless elimination of anyone who might reveal their methods. Thus, the Mongol conquests were not only victories of the horse and bow, but triumphs of secrecy. Their hidden maps, never displayed, never celebrated, and mostly lost to history, were as powerful as any weapon they carried. And in their shadows, we glimpse the truth: the greatest armies of history often march not only with steel and fire, but with secrets written quietly on parchment, carried silently in the minds of men. Japan's medieval castles often appear serene to the modern eye, white walls gleaming against the sky, curving rooftops rising like waves, gardens manicured to perfection, and moats reflecting tranquil water. Yet beneath this beauty lay a hidden world few ever saw: an underground network of tunnels, escape passages, and concealed chambers designed to keep samurai lords alive in times of war. These secret spaces were as much a part of Japan's military strategy as swords and bows, and they tell us that behind the honor and ritual of the samurai lay a constant fear of betrayal, siege, and sudden death. Feudal Japan was a land of shifting alliances. Samurai swore loyalty to their lords, but treachery was common, and battles often erupted without warning. Castles were not just symbols of power but fortresses under constant threat. To survive, daimyo, feudal lords, commissioned architects and builders to lace their strongholds with secret features invisible to the enemy and sometimes even to their own retainers. One of the most famous examples is Himeji Castle, often called the White Heron because of its elegance. Tourists today marvel at its maze-like layout, but this was no accident of design. The castle was built with winding paths that confused invaders, false gates that led attackers into dead ends, and hidden rooms for ambushes. Beneath the surface, tunnels allowed defenders to move quickly between sections, to store weapons, and to provide last-resort escape routes. To a besieging army, the castle was a labyrinth of death. To its defenders, it was a sanctuary full of invisible lifelines. Other castles, like Matsumoto and Matsue, were said to have entire underground corridors extending far beyond their walls. Some legends tell of secret tunnels stretching kilometers away into forests or mountains, designed so the lord and his family could flee if defeat became inevitable. While not all such tales can be proven archaeologically, excavations have uncovered collapsed stone passages, sealed doors, and chambers that suggest these legends held more truth than fiction. The samurai also made use of ninja-inspired architecture, blending espionage with engineering. Hidden trapdoors allowed warriors to vanish between floors. Sliding wall panels concealed staircases or storage areas for weapons. In some castles, the walls themselves were hollowed to create secret passages large enough for a man to crawl through. From these concealed spaces, defenders could launch surprise attacks on enemies who thought they had penetrated the heart of the fortress. But secrecy was not only about escape. It was also psychological warfare. Imagine being an invading soldier storming into a castle, only to find yourself trapped in endless twisting corridors, ambushed by unseen foes emerging from hidden doors. The fear of not knowing where an enemy might appear next was as deadly as the blade itself. Samurai lords understood that the mind was a battlefield, and secret tunnels turned their castles into weapons of confusion and terror. Daily life for the inhabitants of these castles carried an undercurrent of this hidden world. Servants learned which corridors to use and which doors to avoid. Children of the samurai grew up with knowledge of secret stairways and passageways that outsiders could never guess. During times of peace, these tunnels sat in silence, gathering dust. But everyone knew they existed, waiting for the moment when war or betrayal would demand their use. Some of the most remarkable hidden features were not just for defense but for deception. Certain castles included nightingale floors, wooden boards designed to squeak loudly when stepped on, making it impossible for assassins to sneak through unnoticed. Secret wells were dug inside hidden chambers, ensuring water supply during a siege. Food storage was often concealed beneath trapdoors, allowing defenders to outlast sieges longer than attackers could expect. Everything was calculated, everything hidden beneath the surface elegance of Japanese architecture. Legends speak of tunnels built specifically for the shoguns. At Edo Castle, the political heart of Japan, stories tell of hidden corridors that allowed the Tokugawa rulers to move unseen from one part of the compound to another, or even to escape into the city if assassins struck. Though many of these tunnels have never been fully excavated, written accounts from the Edo period whisper of their existence, hinting at a secret geography beneath the streets of Tokyo itself. These hidden passages reveal the constant tension in samurai life. On the one hand, the samurai code, Bushido, spoke of loyalty, courage, and dying with honor. On the other hand, the reality of politics and warfare demanded caution, deception, and survival at all costs. Secret tunnels were not the tools of cowards, they were the practical safeguards of men who understood that even the bravest warrior could fall to treachery, fire, or overwhelming numbers. In the end, the tunnels of the samurai castles stand as silent reminders of a paradox, a culture that prized openness of honor yet built fortresses filled with shadows. Today, when visitors walk the sunlit courtyards of Japan's preserved castles, they walk above a hidden world. Beneath their feet lies the memory of passages carved in stone, of secret stairways, of chambers that once held the hope of escape. Few see them, fewer still enter them, but they remain, echoes of a time when survival depended not only on the sharpness of a sword but on the secrecy of the ground beneath your feet. Few groups in history have inspired as much fascination, fear, and myth as the Knights Templar. To most people today, they are remembered as warrior monks, men in white mantles marked with a red cross, charging into battle during the Crusades with unmatched courage and discipline. But beyond their battlefield reputation lay something far more mysterious, an immense financial network, hidden treasures, and secret practices that made them both indispensable and dangerous to kings and popes alike. Their hidden war chest, whether real or legendary, became one of the greatest mysteries of medieval history. The Templars were founded in the early 12th century, their original purpose simple: to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Yet within decades, they transformed into one of the most powerful organizations in Europe. Unlike most knights, they took vows of poverty and chastity, living in communal discipline. But this outward austerity concealed a different kind of power, wealth not of personal luxury, but of collective treasure. Pilgrims entrusted the Templars with their money, nobles donated lands and estates, and kings borrowed heavily from their coffers. By the 13th century, the Templars controlled a sprawling network of farms, castles, and treasuries across Europe and the Middle East. At the heart of their system was an innovation centuries ahead of its time, a form of early banking. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem could deposit money with the Templars in Europe and receive a coded note. Upon arriving in the Holy Land, they could redeem it for funds of equal value. This not only protected travelers from theft but also allowed the Templars to accumulate staggering amounts of gold, silver, and land. Their order became the backbone of international finance, their hidden war chest extending beyond a single vault into a web of assets across Christendom. This financial power naturally gave rise to secrecy. The Templars developed codes, ciphers, and symbols to protect their accounts. Their records were closely guarded, their inner workings known only to the highest ranks. Outsiders, seeing the wealth and mystery, began to imagine vast underground treasuries, guarded relics, and hoards of gold hidden in secret vaults beneath their fortresses. Some chroniclers whispered that the Templars possessed not only worldly riches but also sacred artifacts, the Ark of the Covenant, fragments of the True Cross, even the Holy Grail itself. Whether these claims hold truth or are inventions of imagination, they cemented the Templars' image as keepers of dangerous secrets. The very structure of the order added to the mystery. The Templars answered not to kings or local lords but directly to the Pope. Their network stretched from Paris to Jerusalem, from Scotland to Cyprus, with commanderies acting as both military outposts and financial centers. The secrecy of their rituals, initiation ceremonies conducted behind closed doors, fueled rumors that they practiced forbidden rites. Enemies accused them of spitting on the cross, worshipping idols, or swearing oaths in blood. Whether these accusations were fabrications or distortions of misunderstood rituals, they added layers of suspicion to their reputation. But power breeds envy, and the Templars' hidden war chest made them targets. By the early 14th century, King Philip IV of France found himself deeply indebted to the order. His treasury was empty, his wars costly, and his crown insecure. To him, the Templars' secretive wealth looked less like holy service and more like a threat to royal authority. In 1307, Philip struck with ruthless precision. On Friday the 13th of October, a date that later fueled superstition, he ordered the mass arrest of the Templars in France. Accusations of heresy, blasphemy, and corruption were hurled at them, many under torture. The Pope, pressured by Philip, dissolved the order in 1312. Yet the most tantalizing question remains: what happened to the Templars' treasure? When Philip's men raided Templar strongholds, they found some gold and silver, but nothing approaching the vast riches rumored to exist. Legend spread that on the eve of the arrests, Templar ships slipped out of the French port of La Rochelle, carrying their treasure across the seas. Some say it was taken to Scotland, hidden beneath Rosslyn Chapel. Others claim it sailed to Switzerland, where it seeded the later rise of secret banking. Still others imagine it buried in underground vaults, lost forever beneath ruined fortresses. The truth has never been uncovered, and the silence of history only deepens the mystery. The Templars' hidden wealth was not just about physical treasure. It was about influence. Their financial system influenced later models of credit and banking. Their disciplined secrecy laid the groundwork for myths of clandestine brotherhoods. Even after their suppression, whispers of their survival lingered. Secret societies in later centuries, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, were often linked, rightly or wrongly, to the legacy of the Templars. Their war chest, whether of gold or of knowledge, seemed to echo across generations. The fascination endures because of the contrast at its heart. On the surface, the Templars were men of God, bound by vows of poverty. Yet beneath this image lay the immense wealth of an international network. They were warriors sworn to humility, yet feared as secret bankers of kings. Their war chest was both real, vaults of coin, estates of land, and legendary, grails, relics, hidden powers. This duality makes their story timeless. Today, the ruins of Templar castles stand across Europe and the Middle East, silent witnesses to their vanished empire. Beneath some of them, archaeologists have found hidden chambers, sealed tunnels, and empty crypts that hint at treasures once stored and perhaps spirited away. But the true contents of the Templars' hidden war chest remain locked in mystery, a secret that collapsed into silence the day the order was destroyed. Thus, the story of the Knights Templar is not just about knights in shining armor. It is about secrecy and survival, about power cloaked in piety, about wealth hidden in plain sight. Their war chest, whatever form it took, was a weapon as potent as their swords. And the fact that it vanished as completely as the order itself ensures that their legend will never fade. The Templars remind us that history's greatest mysteries are often written not in the battles we remember, but in the secrets deliberately concealed. History records countless battles, victories, and defeats, but few mysteries rival that of the Persian army that vanished without a trace. It is a story that seems to belong more to legend than to fact, yet it is written in ancient sources and whispered through centuries of speculation. Around 2,500 years ago, during the reign of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, an entire army, some 50,000 strong, is said to have marched into the desert and never returned. What happened to them has haunted historians, archaeologists, and storytellers alike. Did they perish in a natural catastrophe, fall prey to rebellion, or simply dissolve into the sands of time? The answers remain elusive, making the fate of this lost army of Cambyses one of the strangest enigmas in antiquity. The tale begins in the 6th century BCE, when the Persian Empire stood as one of the most powerful forces in the world. Cambyses II, eager to expand his father's legacy, had already conquered Egypt and added it to Persia's growing empire. Yet not all Egyptians welcomed their new overlord. In particular, the priests and worshippers of the god Ammonius at the great oracle of Siwa resisted Persian rule. In response, Cambyses is said to have dispatched an army to punish the temple and bring the rebellious region under control. Herodotus, the Greek historian who wrote a century later, claimed that Cambyses sent 50,000 men from Thebes, deep into the desert, towards Siwa oasis. According to Herodotus, the soldiers never arrived. They set out, fully equipped, across the western desert, guided by locals who knew the way. After several days of marching, as they reached the heart of the desert, a great sandstorm swept over them. The wind howled, the sands shifted, and the entire army vanished beneath the dunes. Not a man was said to have survived. For Herodotus, the story served as a warning of hubris, a king's pride leading thousands to their deaths in a barren wilderness. But was it true? Skeptics argue that Herodotus may have exaggerated or even invented the tale, using it as a moral lesson. Yet the disappearance is plausible, for the desert is merciless. Sudden sandstorms can bury entire caravans. Supplies can run out. Heat can strip the strength from even the most disciplined soldiers. And unlike modern armies, these men had no maps, no satellites, and no reliable means of communication. If they lost their way, their fate was sealed. Still, the idea that 50,000 men could vanish without a trace has long troubled historians. Some suggest the number was far smaller, perhaps a few thousand, Herodotus known for embellishing figures. Others speculate that the army did not vanish in a storm but was ambushed by local tribes, killed or enslaved before word could return to Cambyses. Some even argue that the soldiers, weary of marching through endless desert, mutinied and scattered, their disappearance later transformed into legend. Archaeologists have hunted for traces of the lost army for more than a century. In 1933, explorers in Egypt claimed to find Persian weapons and fragments of bone in the desert west of Thebes, sparking hope that the mystery was solved. But further evidence proved elusive. In 2009, an Italian archaeological team announced they had uncovered bronze arrowheads, jewelry, and fragments of ancient weaponry buried in the sands of the western desert, near Siwa. The discovery suggested that at least part of the legend might be true. Yet critics noted that without firm dating and context, these remains could belong to other groups who traveled the desert over centuries. The truth slipped once more into uncertainty. What keeps the story alive is not just the question of whether the army existed, but the haunting image of it. Imagine 50,000 soldiers, marching in formation, their armor glinting beneath the desert sun, slowly swallowed by a storm that turned day into night. The sands rose, filled the air, buried their weapons, their banners, their voices. In a matter of hours, an army was reduced to silence, entombed beneath dunes that shifted with every passing year. It is this eerie vision that fuels the legend, transforming it from a dry historical note into a haunting mystery. For Egyptologists, the tale carries symbolic weight. Cambyses II, remembered as a harsh ruler in Egyptian tradition, became a figure of arrogance punished by the gods. To say that his army was destroyed not by men but by the desert itself elevated the story into myth. For Persians, it might have been a shameful defeat, one not recorded in their own chronicles. And for later storytellers, it became a puzzle, a reminder of how fragile human ambition is when set against the vastness of nature. Even today, the desert guards its secrets closely. Satellite imagery, ground surveys, and excavations have failed to yield definitive proof. Shifting sands make the search nearly impossible. One year, dunes bury what might be ruins, the next, the wind strips them bare again. If the army lies somewhere beneath the desert, it may take another stroke of chance to reveal it, just as storms once swallowed it. The Lost Army of Cambyses continues to inspire novels, films, and theories. Some imagine that treasure caravans accompanied the soldiers, meaning that beneath the sands lies not only the bones of warriors but chests of gold, weapons, and ceremonial banners. Others propose that the army's remains are scattered, their story exaggerated into myth because no survivors returned to tell the truth. Perhaps the reality was less dramatic, men dying of thirst, heat, and exhaustion, their bones picked clean by the desert wind. Yet even this grim scenario holds a kind of terrible grandeur. Ultimately, what makes the mystery so compelling is not the certainty of answers but the impossibility of them. The desert is a vast graveyard, erasing history as much as it preserves it. The Persian army's disappearance reminds us that even the mightiest empire cannot conquer nature. Sand can bury steel, storms can silence voices, and whole legions can vanish without leaving a mark. Thus, the fate of the disappearing Persian army remains one of antiquity's most haunting questions. Did they perish in a sandstorm, fall to ambush, or scatter in rebellion? No one can say for sure. What survives is the legend, a story retold across millennia, shimmering on the edge of fact and myth. The soldiers themselves may lie beneath the dunes, waiting for the day when shifting winds reveal their bones to the light. Until then, the desert keeps its secret, and the lost army remains lost. In the candlelit chambers of medieval monasteries, where monks labored over parchment for endless hours, some manuscripts were whispered about with fear. Most medieval texts were devoted to scripture, theology, or chronicles of kings, yet scattered among them were works so strange, so unsettling, that their very existence felt dangerous. These were the manuscripts said to be cursed, books believed to carry misfortune to those who read, copied, or even touched them. While scholars of today might dismiss such notions as superstition, for men and women living in the shadow of plague, famine, and endless wars, the idea that words could carry doom was not unthinkable. One of the most notorious examples is the Codex Gigas, better known as the Devil's Bible. Created in the 13th century in Bohemia, this massive tome weighs more than 165 pounds and contains nearly the entire Latin Bible, along with medical texts, exorcisms, and histories. What makes it infamous is not just its size but its legend. According to medieval stories, the book was written in a single night by a monk who had broken his vows. Condemned to death, he supposedly promised to create a book that would glorify the monastery forever. Realizing the task was impossible, he struck a deal with the devil himself. In exchange for his soul, the devil completed the manuscript, leaving behind not only sacred scripture but also a chilling full-page portrait of himself within its pages. To the pious eyes of the Middle Ages, this image was a blasphemy, a sign that the book itself might be touched by infernal power. The Codex Gigas was rumored to bring calamity wherever it went. When it was taken as war booty during the 30 Years' War, plague and misfortune followed its captors. Soldiers spoke of being haunted by nightmares after handling it. Even centuries later, when the book was displayed in libraries, visitors reported feeling uneasy in its presence, as if the devil's gaze still lingered on the page. Whether these stories were products of suggestible minds or echoes of genuine fear, the Devil's Bible became a symbol of the dangerous allure of knowledge, a reminder that not all books were considered safe. But the Codex Gigas was not alone. Across Europe, whispers surrounded other manuscripts that defied explanation. The Voynich manuscript, discovered centuries later but believed to date back to the 15th century, remains one of the strangest texts in the world. Written in an unknown script and illustrated with bizarre plants, naked figures, and astronomical diagrams, it has resisted every attempt at decipherment. Some believed it to be the work of alchemists or magicians, others thought it encoded forbidden knowledge. For those in the Middle Ages, such a book would not have been a curiosity, it would have been a threat. Words no one could read were words that might conceal heresy, sorcery, or even a curse. Medieval Europe was also filled with grimoires, books of spells and invocations that circulated on the edges of society. The Book of Honorius, the Sworn Book of Honorius, and the Key of Solomon were among the most infamous. They contained rituals for summoning angels and demons, commanding spirits, and bending fate to one's will. To own such a book was to risk accusations of witchcraft. To read from it was said to invite demons into the room. Even when they were simply collections of prayers and esoteric knowledge, their reputations alone were enough to terrify. Priests warned that merely speaking the words aloud could bind one's soul to the devil. Stories also tell of smaller, lesser-known texts that carried strange fates. In monasteries, scribes would occasionally add curses to the books they copied, not supernatural ones, but dire warnings. Whoever steals this book may he be struck down by plague, may he rot in hell, may his soul never find rest. These curses were written partly as legal protection and partly as spiritual deterrent, but over time, they gained reputations of their own. If someone who stole a book later fell sick or died, the text itself became infamous. Soon, entire communities might whisper that a manuscript was cursed, passing the story down through generations. One chilling tale comes from France, where a book of heretical teachings was said to bring madness to those who studied it. Inquisitors burned many such manuscripts, believing that the words themselves carried corruption. To them, a cursed book was not metaphorical, it was a genuine danger to the soul. In an age when literacy was rare and books were treasures, the idea that a volume could hold not just knowledge but danger gave manuscripts an aura of mystical power. What makes these cursed manuscripts so compelling is how they blur the line between faith, fear, and forbidden knowledge. Medieval Europe was a place where the church controlled what could be read, where superstition mingled with devotion, and where natural disasters were often interpreted as divine punishment. In such a world, it made sense to see books as more than ink on parchment. They were gateways, to heaven or hell, to truth or deception, to salvation or damnation. Today, we study these texts in climate-controlled libraries, illuminated by bright lights instead of flickering candles. The Codex Gigas sits in Prague, guarded by glass and admired for its artistry. The Voynich manuscript rests in Yale, still a puzzle unsolved. The grimoires are reprinted and sold openly, their spells read more as curiosities than threats. Yet even now, a trace of unease lingers. What if the monks were right? What if words themselves can carry power, a power that outlives centuries and still whispers to those who dare to open the pages? The cursed manuscripts of medieval Europe remind us of the fear that knowledge once inspired. To the medieval mind, books could change fate, invite doom, or bind the soul to dark forces. Whether the curses were real or imagined, they reveal a truth about human nature, our awe of the written word, our belief that ink and parchment can hold more than stories, they can hold destinies. And so, the image of a monk trembling before a devil's portrait, or a scholar falling ill after handling a forbidden text, continues to haunt us. Even in our age of science, the question lingers, can a book be cursed? For thousands of years, China's dynasties guarded their military secrets as carefully as they guarded their emperors. From the Great Wall to the terracotta armies buried in tombs, Chinese history is filled with symbols of strength and ingenuity. Yet behind the grandeur lay an arsenal of hidden weapons, inventions so advanced for their time that they seemed almost mythical. These were not just tools of war but instruments of intimidation, designed to shock enemies, maintain dominance, and preserve the illusion that China's power was unshakable. Some of these weapons were real and terrifying, others were cloaked in secrecy and legend, deliberately kept hidden from rivals for centuries. Perhaps the most famous was gunpowder, a discovery that would change the world. First developed during the Tang dynasty, gunpowder was initially used for fireworks, rituals, and entertainment. But military minds soon realized its potential. By the 10th century, Chinese armies were deploying fire lances, bamboo or metal tubes filled with powder that shot flames and shrapnel at the enemy. To soldiers who had never seen such a weapon, the effect was terrifying, dragons of fire erupting on the battlefield. Over time, fire lances evolved into crude guns and cannons, giving the Chinese a technological edge that, for a while, no one could match. But gunpowder was not the only secret. Ancient Chinese engineers were masters of combining psychology with technology. Consider the repeating crossbow, also known as the zhuge nu, named after the legendary strategist Zhuge Liang. Unlike ordinary bows, this device allowed soldiers to fire bolt after bolt in rapid succession by operating a lever. Though its range and accuracy were limited compared to longbows, its speed and volume of fire created chaos among enemy lines. It was a weapon designed as much for panic as for precision. In the hands of defending troops, especially women and peasants pressed into service, it became a force multiplier, allowing ordinary citizens to unleash storms of arrows. Even more astonishing were the flamethrowers powered by early knowledge of petroleum. Chinese texts from the Song dynasty describe devices called fierce fire oil throwers, which used double-piston pumps to project burning oil onto enemy ships. Naval warfare was forever changed by these terrifying machines. Enemies caught in the blast not only faced fire but also the psychological terror of seeing entire fleets consumed in flames. To guard the secret of these devices, the Chinese closely monitored the supply of petroleum and executed those who tried to leak the technology abroad. The secrecy surrounding Chinese weapons extended into the realm of myth. Stories tell of thunder crash bombs, iron shells filled with gunpowder and shrapnel, hurled by catapults or early mortars. When they exploded, they produced noise so loud it was said to shake the heavens. Imagine being a soldier in the 13th century, hearing an explosion that roared louder than anything you had ever known, watching fragments rip through your comrades. To many, it must have seemed as if the gods themselves had joined the battle. Other hidden technologies included poisoned arrows, coated with deadly toxins derived from plants and minerals, and mechanical traps placed around fortresses. Some ancient texts describe crossbows rigged to fire when doors were opened, or pits filled with sharpened stakes concealed beneath thin mats. Siege warfare became a contest not only of strength but of cunning, as attackers never knew whether the ground itself might rise against them. China also weaponized animals in ways both ingenious and horrifying. Records tell of soldiers attaching incendiary devices to birds, then releasing them to set fire to enemy structures. Mongol accounts describe encounters with war wagons mounted with scythe blades, mowing through infantry like living reapers. While some of these stories may be exaggerations, they reflect the creativity and brutality that characterized China's hidden military traditions. Perhaps most impressive was the Chinese mastery of naval warfare. Long before Europe built its great fleets, China's rivers and coasts bristled with warships equipped with catapults, flamethrowers, and boarding bridges. Some Song dynasty ships were constructed with watertight bulkheads, an innovation that would not appear in the West for centuries. Others carried paddle wheels powered by human labor, allowing them to maneuver swiftly in battle. These innovations, closely guarded, made Chinese fleets dominant in East Asia, their strength rooted in technological advantage as much as numbers. Secrecy was essential. Military manuals such as the Wujing Zongyao, collection of the most important military techniques, compiled in the 11th century, contained recipes for gunpowder, designs for bombs, and descriptions of advanced siege engines. These texts were restricted to trusted officials and generals, guarded like state treasures. To leak their contents was treason, to attempt to copy them without permission was death. In this way, China preserved its edge for centuries, even as other nations struggled to catch up. And yet, the very secrecy that protected China's weapons also ensured that their dominance would not last forever. When gunpowder technology eventually spread along the Silk Road, it transformed the world. Cannons thundered in Europe, muskets reshaped battlefields, and empires rose on the back of Chinese invention. But the West claimed the future of gunpowder warfare, while China, once the innovator, fell into defensive stagnation. The weapons that had once been hidden treasures became common tools, their mystery stripped away. Still, the legacy of these secret weapons lingers. To imagine standing on the battlefield as fire lances erupted, as thunder crash bombs roared, or as ships burst into flames is to glimpse a world where technology was as terrifying as it was awe-inspiring. These inventions remind us that China's power was never just in its numbers or its walls, but in the shadows of its hidden arsenals. And while much has been uncovered, there may still be secrets buried in forgotten manuals or tombs, waiting to tell us that ancient China's military genius was even greater than we yet know. World War II is often remembered for its sweeping tank battles, aerial dogfights, and the thunder of artillery across open fields. Yet beneath the surface, hidden away from the skies and the eyes of enemies, another war was being fought. It was a war of tunnels, bunkers, and vast underground fortresses carved into stone and soil. Some of these subterranean strongholds were built for survival, others for secrecy, and still others for the launch of terrifying weapons. They represent one of the most fascinating and hidden aspects of the war, the underground world that lay just beneath the boots of millions of soldiers. One of the most infamous examples lies in France, the Maginot Line. Built in the years between World War I and World War II, it was a colossal system of underground bunkers, artillery positions, railways, and living quarters designed to keep Germany from invading again. From the surface, the line looked like little more than concrete forts and gun turrets. But below, it was a labyrinth stretching for miles, with hospitals, kitchens, and barracks built into the earth. Soldiers could live there for weeks, safe from bombardment, while moving supplies and troops via underground rail. The French believed the Maginot Line was impregnable, a fortress that would hold back invasion. Yet the Germans bypassed it by attacking through Belgium, rendering much of it irrelevant. The Maginot Line became less a triumph of defense and more a symbol of misplaced faith in static fortifications. Still, the sheer scale of the underground complex remained staggering. The Germans themselves became masters of subterranean engineering during the war. Hitler and his generals built countless bunkers and underground command centers to survive Allied bombing campaigns. The Wolf's Lair in East Prussia was one such site, a heavily fortified headquarters where Hitler spent much of the war. Surrounded by thick forest, the bunkers were camouflaged and reinforced with massive concrete walls. It was here, in July 1944, that the most famous assassination attempt against Hitler took place, when Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb in a meeting room. Though the explosion killed several officers, Hitler survived, shielded by the fortress-like construction. But some German underground projects were even more secretive and ambitious. As Allied bombers destroyed factories above ground, the Nazis moved their production underground. In Austria, the Mittelwerk facility was carved into the Harz Mountains, where forced laborers produced the V-2 rockets that rained down on London. Thousands of prisoners from concentration camps worked and died in the tunnels, their suffering hidden beneath the earth while the weapons of the future took shape around them. These underground fortresses were not just shelters, they were sites of horror, blending technological ambition with human tragedy. Meanwhile, in Britain, the threat of invasion and bombing forced its own descent underground. Beneath London, the government established cabinet war rooms, where Winston Churchill and his staff directed the defense of the nation. These cramped corridors, reinforced against bombs, became the nerve center of Britain's war effort. Ordinary citizens also sought refuge underground, packing into the tunnels of the London Underground during nightly bombing raids. Images survive of families huddled on platforms, children sleeping on makeshift beds, while the city above burned. For them, the underground was not a fortress of steel and concrete but a lifeline of survival, a shield against destruction. The Japanese too created vast underground defenses. On islands across the Pacific, particularly Okinawa and Iwo Jima, they carved entire networks of tunnels and bunkers into the rock. These fortresses allowed Japanese soldiers to survive days of bombardment and continue fighting long after Allied forces thought the island secure. On Iwo Jima, General Tadamaki Kuribayashi's network of bunkers and tunnels turned the island into a death trap, forcing U.S. Marines into one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. For the Japanese, going underground was not just about protection but about prolonging resistance at any cost. Perhaps the most secretive underground project of all was linked to the development of nuclear weapons. At sites across the United States, such as Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, facilities were hidden and secured, though not always fully underground, to protect the world's most guarded secret, the Manhattan Project. In Germany, Allied intelligence feared that similar underground sites might conceal a Nazi atomic program, though evidence after the war showed that such fears were exaggerated. Still, the race for subterranean secrecy was a defining feature of wartime science. What makes these underground fortresses so compelling is their dual nature. On one hand, they were marvels of engineering, feats of construction carried out under immense pressure and often in secrecy. On the other, they were symbols of fear, evidence that nations no longer trusted the surface of the earth to keep them safe. They reflect the paranoia of total war, where survival required burrowing like moles, carving out shelters against the fire raining from the skies. Even after the war ended, many of these fortresses remained. Some were abandoned, crumbling in silence. Others were repurposed during the Cold War, when the threat of nuclear annihilation gave underground bunkers new relevance. Today, tourists can walk the halls of Churchill's war rooms or explore sections of the Maginot Line, marveling at the lengths to which humanity went to wage war from beneath the ground. Yet in places like Mittelwerk, where thousands perished, the underground fortresses are memorials to suffering as much as engineering. The story of World War II is usually told on the battlefields and in the skies, but beneath it all lay another layer of history, hidden, claustrophobic, and essential. These underground fortresses remind us that war is not only fought in open fields of glory but also in shadows, tunnels, and hidden chambers where survival itself became a strategy. In their silence today, they echo with the voices of those who lived, commanded, or died within them, reminders of a world that believed the only safe place was below the earth. Wars are not won only with weapons, soldiers, and strategy on the battlefield. Often, the greatest victories come from battles fought in silence, wars of words, symbols, and hidden messages. Throughout history, secret codes and ciphers have shaped the outcomes of empires, determined the rise and fall of nations, and saved millions of lives. These codes were invisible weapons, their power lying not in steel or fire but in the ability to conceal truth from enemies and reveal it to allies. From ancient kingdoms to the global conflicts of the 20th century, codes have been the hidden threads pulling at the fabric of war. One of the earliest known examples of secret communication comes from the Greeks. Historians tell of the scytale, a cipher device used by the Spartans. It consisted of a strip of parchment wrapped around a wooden rod. When the strip was unrolled, the letters appeared meaningless, but when rewrapped around a rod of the same diameter, the message became clear. This simple yet clever method allowed generals to pass orders without fear of interception. To their enemies, the letters looked like gibberish. To their comrades, they carried life-or-death instructions. The scytale set the stage for centuries of code-making, proving that information itself could be as valuable as a spear or shield. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, cryptography became a powerful tool for kings and spies. Figures like Leon Battista Alberti created cipher disks that allowed for complex substitutions, making messages nearly impossible for casual interceptors to read. Courts across Europe employed cryptographers as highly valued advisors. But with codes came codebreakers. By the 16th century, nations like Spain and France had entire departments devoted to intercepting and deciphering enemy communications. The battle of intellect was constant. As soon as a code grew too familiar, a new one was invented. In the 20th century, the role of secret codes exploded. World War I was already a conflict of ciphers, with Germany and Britain both intercepting messages. But it was in World War II that codes became decisive weapons. None is more famous than the Enigma machine, the cipher device used by Nazi Germany. With its rotating wheels and electrical circuits, Enigma could produce trillions of combinations, making it seem unbreakable. German officers trusted it completely, sending orders, troop movements, and naval coordinates with confidence that no enemy could crack them. Yet in hidden rooms in Britain, a team of mathematicians, linguists, and engineers worked tirelessly to prove them wrong. At Bletchley Park, figures like Alan Turing developed machines capable of testing thousands of possible settings per minute, eventually breaking Enigma's code. This achievement allowed the Allies to intercept and read German communications, gaining insights into submarine movements and military strategies. Historians estimate that the work at Bletchley shortened the war by as much as 2 years, saving countless lives. It was one of the most important hidden victories in history, fought not with guns but with mathematics and perseverance. But not all secret codes were born of machines. In the Pacific Theater, the United States turned to an ancient tradition, the spoken language of the Navajo people. The Navajo code talkers created an unbreakable code by translating military terms into their native language, which was unknown to the Japanese and too complex for them to decipher. For instance, bomber plane became buzzard, while a submarine became iron fish. Using these terms, Navajo soldiers transmitted messages at lightning speed, faster than any mechanical cipher system. Their contribution was critical during battles like Iwo Jima, where flawless communication saved thousands of lives. The brilliance of the Navajo code talkers lay not only in its secrecy but in its simplicity, a living code, spoken rather than written, built on cultural knowledge outsiders could never penetrate. Other nations had their own code secrets. The Japanese employed the purple cipher machine, a complex system that baffled many until American cryptographers managed to crack it, allowing them to intercept diplomatic messages. The Soviets used the infamous one-time pad, theoretically unbreakable when used correctly. Meanwhile, spies on both sides smuggled messages hidden in microdots, invisible ink, or even sewn into clothing. Codes were not just about machines, they were about creativity, deception, and daring. The stakes for breaking codes could not have been higher. When the Allies broke Japan's naval code in 1942, they discovered plans for an ambush at Midway. Armed with this knowledge, the U.S. Navy turned the trap against its enemy, securing one of the most decisive victories of the Pacific War. A single code break had altered the balance of the ocean. Similarly, intercepts of German communications allowed the Allies to anticipate U-boat attacks, saving supply convoys that kept Britain alive during its darkest hours. Without these invisible victories, the visible ones on land and sea might never have been possible. Yet for all their success, codes also carried risks. If enemies discovered that their ciphers had been broken, they could change them instantly, rendering years of effort useless. This meant secrecy was as vital for the codebreakers as for the codemakers. At Bletchley Park, even those who cracked Enigma were sworn to silence, their work classified for decades. Many went to their graves never speaking of the role they played in changing the course of history. Only in recent years have their contributions been fully recognized. What makes secret codes so compelling is the paradox they represent. They are symbols of both fragility and power. A code can hold the fate of an army, yet a single breakthrough can unravel it completely. They remind us that war is not only fought by soldiers on the battlefield but also by unseen minds in darkened rooms, bending language and numbers into weapons. Today, the tradition of wartime codes lives on in the digital age. Encryption protects military communications, cyber warfare relies on breaking codes, and governments still guard their secrets as fiercely as ever. The legacy of the Skittily, the Enigma, and the Navajo code talkers continues, proving that the hidden war of words never truly ends. The secret codes that changed wars are more than clever puzzles from history. They are the silent battles that shifted tides, the invisible victories that altered destinies. Behind every great moment of triumph in war, there often lies a message, hidden, encrypted, and waiting to be unlocked by the right mind at the right time. History is not only the story of kings, battles, and empires, it is also the story of what was kept hidden. Throughout this journey, we have uncovered secrets buried in vaults, whispered in shadows, and coded in ways that only a few could understand. These military secrets, once locked away, shaped the rise and fall of civilizations. They remind us that power is not just about strength on the battlefield, but also about information, deception, and timing. To rule in silence, to strike with knowledge unseen, that is the essence of military secrecy. When we look back across the centuries, we realize that these secrets were never just footnotes. They were often the very forces steering history. Ancient emperors hid weapons of terror to control their rivals. Secret societies of warriors trained in techniques never shared with outsiders. Naval commanders relied on hidden maps and codes to chart the seas, while medieval rulers turned knowledge of disease, psychology, or poison into weapons as devastating as armies. By the modern era, secrecy had transformed into a science. Intelligence agencies, cryptographers, and covert operatives working behind curtains of deception. The battlefield shifted from open combat to invisible wars waged in cipher rooms, secret laboratories, and clandestine meetings. One striking theme emerges: secrets give power, but they also demand silence. The Enigma codebreakers, whose work saved millions, lived most of their lives unable to speak of their contribution. The Navajo code talkers, whose unbreakable language shaped victory in the Pacific, were sworn to secrecy for decades. Even today, many of the files from the world's greatest conflicts remain classified, locked away in government vaults, their truths hidden not just from enemies but from the public as well. We can only imagine what stories are still waiting in the dark, stories that may rewrite what we think we know. These hidden military secrets also remind us of human creativity under pressure. Soldiers and scientists alike turned to ingenuity in moments of desperation. They crafted codes, devices, and tactics that were as much art as science. From a strip of parchment wrapped around a rod in ancient Sparta to advanced encryption in the digital age, the thread of secrecy ties past to present. The tools have changed, but the principle remains: to conceal information is to wield power. But there is a darker side, too. Secrets can preserve nations, but they can also destroy them. A ruler who hoards knowledge risks isolation. A general who hides too much from his own people may sow distrust. And when military secrets fall into the wrong hands, they can become catastrophic. History is filled with examples of spies who sold secrets, traitors who revealed them, and empires that crumbled because their secrets were betrayed. The same hidden forces that protect can also corrupt. What makes these military secrets so enduring is their invisibility. Unlike monuments, weapons, or armies, they often leave no trace. They live in whispers, in ink that fades, in codes that crumble once cracked. Yet their impact is as real as any battlefield. Without them, some wars would have lasted longer, others might never have been fought, and the map of the modern world would look very different. Today, as we stand in an age of satellites, artificial intelligence, and digital espionage, the nature of secrets has changed but not disappeared. Cyber warfare, encryption, surveillance, all are modern echoes of the same ancient struggle to protect knowledge and exploit weakness. In many ways, the future will only deepen this reliance on secrecy. The wars of tomorrow may not be fought with swords or tanks but with hidden codes, secret algorithms, and invisible attacks across the digital battlefield. So, what is the legacy of these hidden military secrets? It is a reminder that history is never complete. What we know is only a fragment of the truth. Behind every victory, every surrender, every empire that rose or collapsed, there were invisible battles waged in silence. Soldiers marched, generals commanded, but it was often the hidden hands of secret keepers that shaped the final outcome. As viewers, as historians, as seekers of truth, we are left with both awe and caution. Awe at the brilliance, the bravery, and the creativity of those who mastered the art of secrecy. Caution at the realization that what we know today may one day be overturned by secrets still buried. The past is filled with revelations that changed our understanding, and the future will likely bring more. In the end, the story of military secrets is not just about war, it is about the human condition. Our desire to protect, to outwit, to survive, and to dominate has always driven us to hide as much as we reveal. Every locked vault, every coded message, every forbidden archive speaks to the same truth, that the greatest battles are not always seen, but felt in silence. And perhaps, centuries from now, when historians look back at our era, they will find that the most decisive wars of our time were not fought in open fields but in hidden places, where secrecy was the sharpest weapon of all.